Some people may think the content of this video is a little bit boring. Hopefully the video isn't boring if I can distinguish the two. But if you follow through with some of these ideas, it could save you hours, days, weeks of frustration. Yes, the topic is organisation. And I can hear people clicking away from the video straight away. You probably know most of this stuff anyway, but if you are a beginner just putting together a computer-based music system, I think you will find this very helpful. If you are upgrading your computer and creating a new music system, you might also find this helpful. Now, I've been using computers since the Stone Age, and if you've been using computers for any length of time, you will have developed your own system, I guess, of where you store the files. Over the years, I've developed a sort of ad hoc organisational system. Now, it's very loose, it's very flexible. I'd like to share some of the ideas with you in the hope that you may find them useful as well. Now, if you're anything like me, and I sincerely hope you're not, but if you have similar work practices to me, as you get more and more software, as your internal hard drive fills up, you will buy a second hard drive and start putting stuff onto there. Now, this might seem a good idea at the time, but if you were a little bit forward thinking, as I have not always been, you would realise that this is probably not the best way to organise your files. Now, in particular, I am talking about big sample libraries, but also smaller VST instruments which are sample based and therefore have a sample content. But I'm also going to talk about one other type of file, installers. Now, as you probably know, sample libraries can be gigantic, 50, 60, 70 gig, if not more. So if you have a few sample libraries and install all these onto your main C drive on the PC, I think a lot of the information here will apply to Mac users as well. But if you put this on your main single drive, it can very quickly fill up. So the first suggestion is very simple. If you're going to use a lot of sample libraries or even VSTs with a sample content, get a second drive. If you have a desktop PC, then these are easily fitted internally. Some laptops actually come with 2 internal drives. Otherwise, you can use a USB drive. Now, if you're going to run samples from these drives, then obviously they are going to perform a lot better if you use SSDs, solid state drives, rather than mechanical drives. Now, the price has been coming down dramatically over the last few years. A short while ago, I bought a 4 terabyte SSD for the music machine. That was when I upgraded to Komplete 14. The basic installation size of that is over 1 terabyte. That's an awful lot of disk space. Now, it was obviously a lot more expensive than a mechanical drive, but I thought the speed advantages were worthwhile. However, whatever you decide, if you have a second drive, then my suggestion would be to store all your sample libraries on the second drive. If the VST has sample content, then I would also suggest storing the sample content on the external drive. Now, you might think that's obvious. Fair enough, yes, it is. But it's not something I actually did when I was setting up my music system. I didn't think far enough ahead to do that. However, the music machine, as I call it, crashed 2 years ago. Now, this was a Windows crash. It wasn't a hardware crash. Good old Windows. I spent 4 days researching this on the internet to see if I could find a fix so it would recover, but no, it wouldn't have it. So I only had 2 options. If you've ever had to reinstall Windows, you will know what they are. You can do a completely clean Windows reinstall, which wipes everything from your hard drive, or you can opt to retain personal files, but the reinstallation will get rid of all the apps. Now, I was becoming a little bit more organised than usual at this point 2 years ago, but I wasn't 100% sure if I had any files, personal files that I desperately needed to keep. So I opted for the second option, which retains your files but wipes all the apps off the main drive. But because I was semi-organised, all my sample files and libraries were on second drives other internal drives or even external drives. So that meant I didn't have to reinstall all of them, which would have been, I would have still been doing it 2 years later. So the first reason for keeping your libraries on a second drive is if your first drive, if the C drive goes pear-shaped, you don't lose them and you don't have to reinstall them. There's also another very good reason for keeping big files off the C drive. Some installers, if not all of them, will install software to the C drive by default. The better ones offer the option to change the installation path, but not all do, and in any event, you will probably find if you go hunting for them that things like app data folders are full of setup files and control files and presets and goodness knows what else. Installers, particularly on the PC, put files all over the place, and these often, generally, will always go on the C drive. So your C drive will fill up without any additional help from you. So the idea is to keep your C drive as big as possible for as long as possible. And the easy way to do that is just to install all the big files onto a second drive, or a third drive, or more. I have 6 drives in total on the music machine. So before we get to sample library organization, one more thing about the C drive. Now, how you organize your files and documents is obviously up to you. Most of my document type files, Word files, Excel files, PDFs and so on are stored in my documents folder. So I do make a point of backing this up simply by dragging it to one of the external drives every few weeks or every month. I don't keep anything in the downloads folder. I don't keep anything in the pictures folder. But if you do, then these are folders that you might want to backup as well. I find this far easier than running a dedicated backup program. I actually made a video saying I don't backup at all, which is basically true. If you want to watch the folly of my ways, then a card should pop up there and I'll leave a link to that one in the description. So the point of all these little backups is that if the thing crashes again, I will be happy to do a totally clean reinstall, knowing that my documents are safe, or at least the ones up until a couple of weeks ago, and I won't be losing any vital data. One other thing on this point, I also keep all the installation programs on an external drive. So if you're anything like me, yes, we've done that. If you're anything like me, you will have dozens of installation programs. They'll all have their own little setup exe executable files. You might have serial numbers, activation codes, and so on. You really don't want to lose these. Some of them are quite large as well and would take up a lot of space on the C drive. So as I say, I keep as much stuff off the C drive as possible. So that is basically tip number 1. Tip number 2 follows on from that, and it's simply about the way you organize your sample libraries on your external drives, of course. Now, I use a couple of methods. I have several folders which are named according to the instrument types, such as piano, guitar, voices, percussion. Now, I realise you could go on forever subdividing the sample library types into subfolders. So how far you want to go with this is up to you. Now, I find this very useful because if I want a piano, for example, I know exactly which folder to go to. So they're just the categories I use. I have a lot of orchestral sample libraries, which I probably tend not to use as much as I possibly should. But I have another hard drive which is full of orchestral sample libraries. I also have another drive, actually this is running into 2 drives now, which are full of miscellaneous sounds which don't comfortably fit into one of the subcategories. So as I say, you can go as deep with this as you want to, or just be very loose about how you organize your samples. Now, most sample libraries will install with the developer's name and then the sample library type. And that is the folder naming convention that I use. One thing I do is to make sure that the formatting in the folder names are all the same. In that way I can sort by name, and all the sample libraries by individual developers will appear in the list. Now, if you don't have many sample libraries or don't see yourself getting many sample libraries over the next several years, because this is a computer system which hopefully will last you for many years, then you may not feel the need to subcategorize them, and you can just put them all in one folder. As I said, I have 2 drives where the sample libraries are just listed by name and are not in subfolders. But even so, even if you only have a couple of piano sample libraries, for example, I think it's good practice, because you then know where all the samples of a particular type are. Now, I have, as I have said on this channel a few times, a silly number of sample libraries and VST instruments. So having some sort of organization like this is very helpful, because it keeps all the libraries in front of me. It's very easy to get a piece of software, use it for a few days and get distracted and totally forget about it. Well, that has happened to me on a few occasions. So by subcategorizing them into their instrument type, I think helps avoid that. Final tip: before you start, decide on the folder structure that you are going to use, and do try to think a few years ahead when you may get more instruments or sample libraries than you may think you are actually going to get. Gas can rear its ugly head at any time, because the thing is, once you have a library in a certain location, you do not want to move it. Otherwise your door will not be able to find it. You will get messages popping up saying it can't find a particular instrument. You may be able to open the project, find the instrument, load the sound again. You may not. I would rather not have that problem. So once you have your sample libraries organized, don't mess with them. One final, it's a sort of tip, I guess. Now, if you are wondering whether or not it's time to upgrade your computer system, you may want to know how old your computer actually is, if you can't remember. Now, I couldn't. I thought my music machine over there was about 7, maybe 8 years old. I thought it could even be older, but I wasn't sure. So there are a few ways you can tell, or you can estimate how old your computer is. Now, the method I've used is simply to use the command prompt and to type in a command which reveals your system information. And I got the age of the machine from the age of the BIOS. Here's how I did it. So, press the Windows key, type CMD to open the command prompt. I always right click on this and select Run as Administrator. I'm not sure it's 100% necessary in this case, but that's just what I do. Here's the command prompt. So we now want to type systeminfo, all one word, .exe, and press enter, and you will see you get a ton of information about your system, as you would hope from such a command. Now, I will just blow this up a little bit. I'm not sure if you'll be able to read it because it has been enlarged, but you will certainly be able to read this information on your system. And here it tells me that the BIOS date was 2016. I'll put the 2 commands in the description just in case you didn't pick them up from the video. Now, one potential failure of this method would be if you have upgraded the BIOS since buying the machine, then that is probably the date that would show on the BIOS and not the actual date of the machine. I'm pretty sure I didn't update the BIOS, certainly not over recent years. I may have done perhaps a month or 2 or even 6 or 8 months after I bought it. It's always a good idea to check to see if the BIOS has got an update so you can be sure you are running the latest version. There are other ways to estimate how old your PC is. I shall leave a link to an article explaining how to do that in the description. So that's a fairly simple method I use to organize my sample libraries, and the reason why I do so. If you have a different method, then let me know in the comments. I'm sure that will be very interesting and useful to many people. That's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video interesting or useful, perhaps you would like to consider subscribing to the channel. And if you don't mind clicking the big thumb, that would be a big help as well. And if you have enjoyed this video, I think you will enjoy these videos too. Thanks again. See you soon in the next one.